Hello fear seekers, and welcome back, finally, to the channel. I know I've been absent for some time, and for that I apologize. I was dealing with some health issues that I had to get sorted out. But anyways, that's not what this video is about. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, Halloween horror stories. Now without further ado, sit back, ignore the feeling that you're being watched, and get ready to ferment your fears. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house. Like, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of the cousins dared us to trick-or-treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging noises in the house, suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hands and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of those rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's home. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived, by the way, but has a long scar across her neck to this day. This is a relatively old story that my dad has told me a few times over the years, but with Halloween coming up, it's been on my mind again. I myself have never been able to witness the house, though the description I've been given by multiple men 20-something years after seeing it gave me a very vivid mental image. To begin, I would like to mention that my father is a highly religious man, a preacher's son, and does not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal in the slightest. Nothing seems to spook him either, but he still swears up and down that he felt something unnatural that scared the hell out of him even just from mentioning the story to me on the rare occasions that he would even bring it up. Back in the late 80s, he and a few friends would regularly hike over the waterfall/creek bed behind our farm and would follow the trails up until they eventually met the frontage road off of the interstate. Well, one night they decided to take a different route to go around the backside of another farmer's land, mostly to see the animals because they owned emus and other large pets that weren't common in the local area. Supposedly, after leaving the area and continuing into the woods, at night of all wonderful times, they managed to stumble upon what is described by all 5 men, 20 years later, as a Blair Witch look-alike house. It was a very, very old home, and my dad claims that just looking at it gave him this ominous feeling, but of course they had to go inside and check it out. Inside the house was a vintage cottage-style home that was probably built in the late 40s or early 50s, and the group was instantly met with writing and symbols in strange Latin-like languages with a few English graffiti pieces that quoted a supposed satanic or pagan worshipping ritual, with certain pieces describing how to sacrifice a human soul to some supposedly demonic deity. My father still claims to this day that certain symbols were painted on the walls in blood while others were clearly spray paint, and I find it easier to believe because he also worked as a firefighter for years before this happened, and had a lot of experience with having to see human blood and dismembered bodies on the freeway after car accidents. Past a small living/kitchen area was a stairwell that was so small that their shoulders would physically brush either side of the wall as they went up, and the stairs went straight, stopped at a small landing, then turned right so as you started up you could not see what might be standing at the top. At the top of the stairs, a door led to a strange attic-style bedroom where actual chain manacles and locks hung from one of the walls near a circular window at the end of the room, which was also completely covered in weird symbols, graffiti, and now more obvious and frightening large dried puddles of blood that had seeped into the floors and walls. Allegedly, once they were upstairs investigating the room, they swear that they heard someone moving up the stairwell behind them quickly, but when they looked back there was no one there. Everyone essentially told me that it sounded almost like heels clacking on wood, and now completely spooked, they rushed back down the stairs to see if someone was playing a prank on them and was hiding downstairs. Surprise, surprise, they found nothing and no new footprints in the dust and grime that differed from the ones they left on their way in. To keep things interesting, I met with each of the guys separately to ask them about what they remembered, expecting to maybe find a crack or something to prove that maybe they were exaggerating. But when I asked them, I got the same answer from each of them with no hesitation. They got the same details right down to the minute that they entered the house and the minute they left. But here's where it gets really strange. They left the house and for some unknown reason decided to try walking back from a different route, using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They did this test more than 10 times that night, walking from every possible route or direction, yet they always came out at the front entrance of the house, even when the compass and common knowledge of the area showed that it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they moved in a straight line from the north, east, or west. There probably is some scientific explanation for it, but I haven't found one yet. These guys knew those woods literally like the back of their hands, and still do to this day. The final time that the guys came back and found themselves standing at the front door of the house, they began to feel physically ill, verging on feverish, and finally decided that it was time to give up when one of them nearly fainted. And as they turned to leave, the man who nearly fainted turns, looks up, and points at the circular window at the front of the house on the second story. Everyone looks and immediately sees a tall female figure hunched over standing in the window watching them. Though they see no features on her face other than 2 large dark-colored eyes, and it sort of shuffled in place slightly before turning and walking away as if it were heading to the stairs at the end of the room. At the sight of the figure actually moving, they all took off running through the woods, ending up on the side of the interstate about 3 miles from my dad's house, where they originally started from. They eventually made it back to my dad's place, though they claimed that they felt as if someone were following them the entire way, and my dad's cousin gets up to get some water from the kitchen, only to announce that he swore that he saw the same figure standing outside of the kitchen window near the edge of the woods, close to the woodshed. Thankfully, nothing ever came from the experience other than a collective state of absolute terror when the subject is brought up. They wrote off what his cousin saw as paranoia or pareidolia, though 5 years later they decided to return to see if the house was still standing. Miraculously, it had fallen in on itself and was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back. I always joked with my dad and would ask him what he would do if he went back and found the house standing the same way it had back then, trying to give him a reason to let me go and see the place for myself, But with trespassing laws being far more prevalent in today's times, it would be nearly impossible without either getting shot or going to jail, as it was not on our property. I don't know. It always gives me the creeps thinking about it. But I never considered the story to be true until I did this little mock interview with all the guys. And when I say that these grown men are scared to death by this story, I mean it. Seeing them get physically worked up and frightened by just telling the story really caused me to be less of a skeptic. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it possible that they were just spooked and it caused them to see things? The story is so cliché and ridiculous that no one ever believes it's real except for the people that were there. It was Halloween 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had off the day after Halloween, because it's considered a church holy day, so my friends were game to start our weekend early. On nights where we didn't go to parties, we usually do the same thing. We'd sit on my front steps for a couple of hours and joke around, then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this honestly pretty crappy pizza place across town, because the prices were so cheap. Since a few of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we weren't in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It was around 10 or 10:30 at night and the pizza joint is closing up for the night. There were 3 of us. Me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finish our food, refill our drinks, and head out. To get back to my house, we had to cross this large mall parking lot that's about 4 football fields long and 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we aren't dumb, naive kids. We all had grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise and were competent out on the street by ourselves, but we experienced something this night that we were totally unprepared for. So, we're walking through this parking lot, and it's absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight. Suddenly, we see a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know the old white van cliché, but I swear it's a real story. I point it out to my friends and we pick up our pace. We pop the collars on our jackets and hunch our shoulders to make us seem a bit bigger than we are. In an instant, the van speeds up and cuts off our path. Everything in the van is pitch black, so we can't see any people. That's when someone calls out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween. You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't cut you off in a parking lot unless it has bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We could run, but they're in a van. They would catch up to us easily and we'd have to turn our backs to them. He says it again. "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I respond, trying to sound tough. "Yeah, but it's over now, so we're heading home and you're in our way." "Nah dude, Halloween ain't over. We still got tons of candy in here." The tone suddenly shifted and still we can't see anyone in the van. The 3 of us puff out our chests and get ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by sternly saying, "Listen, I don't know what you think you're about to do, but if you don't leave, we're gonna kick your ass." Once he said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had black suits with black leather gloves and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't a Halloween prank. At that moment, all 3 of us went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of the situation. I have no idea what these guys were planning to do with 3 18-year-old men, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing and we were all getting ready for the fight of our lives. The van stopped and it looked like they were about to make their move. This was it. I mentioned that there were 3 of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend, Pat, the one that had stayed silent up to this point, leaned into both of us and quietly said, "This is a Hail Mary, but get ready to run when I say go, alright?" He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it with all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat screamed, "Run!" and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction and we hurried our asses home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happened. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped a big rock into his cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or it at least bought us enough time to put some distance between us and the van. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that. I'm still amazed by it. Moral of the story, kids, don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight. Since I was 7 years old, Halloween has been my favorite holiday. While most of my family was already excited about Christmas decorations to put up, I stayed busy trying to throw on my costume so I could run through my neighborhood with a stained pillowcase in hand. October 31st, 2010 changed my Halloween plans for the rest of my childhood, and most of my young adult life. I was 10 years old at the time. We had concluded the Halloween party we threw for close friends and neighbors that year. Even as a kid, I knew that the air was thick with the smell of beer, hard liquor, and whatever other adult treat people brought for liquor treating. The Lipsons were still at the house. They were my parents' closest friends, so they stayed long after everyone else drunkenly waddled through the front door with their sober enough to drive spouses and sugar-crashed children. To put up with the obnoxious and loud party for two families, I sat in the music room by myself and counted my candy earnings for the night. About 12 wrappers into counting, I hear a knock on the front door. I found this odd because we turned the front porch light off once most of the party had left. I figured maybe it was either some kid who was late trick-or-treating, a greedy kid trying to get some extra candy, or maybe even a party guest who forgot something. Looking back, I should have let my parents or even one of the Lipsons open the door, but I was a kid and it was the one night a year where strangers knocking on your door all night is normal. That was the other thing. They knocked. All night there had been kids ranging from my age to young adults. Not one of them knocked on my door, but rather they just rang the doorbell. When I stood up, I grabbed the mask I had worn all night. I didn't put it on all the way though. It smelled like sweat, spit, and warm breath. I went to open the front door, my mask resting on the top of my head, and a half-empty bowl of candy the neighborhood kids had picked apart like sugar vultures all night balanced in one hand. Before I could get to the door, the 3 knocks that scared me enough the first time repeated. It made me jump so hard that my mask fell off in my head and I had to stabilize the candy bowl with my other hand. The adult conversation happening in the other room had silenced to my ears. All I could focus on was what was on the other side of my door. Finally, I swallowed my fear and crept the door open. In front of me, I could see a man, not a kid. I'm not entirely sure if it was a teenager. He wore a glossy blue skull mask with a black robe covering the rest of his body. I would have held the candy bucket out for him, but he was in the middle of my lawn. How could he have knocked on my door? I thought to myself. All I hear are the crickets screaming in the dark bushes and the man in the mask breathing slowly. Do you want some candy?" I nervously mutter out. From the middle of my lawn, I see the man in the mask tilt his head slowly, and his breathing stops. I'm not sure how long we stood there, me at my doorway and him dead still in the darkness. I was frozen in fear. I waited for him to move, for him to breathe again, or at least just walk away. I go to turn on my front porch light to get a better look at him. I think maybe if I can see more, I'll be able to tell that it's just one of my friend's brothers trying to scare me. I lean back into the house and flip the light switch upwards. Before I can look back into my yard to check if the man in the mask is someone I know, I hear him breathing again. It's different though. He's excited. I look out and I see him walking towards my house with head still tilted. Does he want the candy in my hand? Before I can answer that question, I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. My head dashes to the left and I see another man in a mask walking to me from the other side of my house. I look back at the man in my yard. He's on my walkway, in front of my house, and walking with more haste. It seems as if he knows he doesn't have much time to get to me, so he knew he needed to speed up. This was the first time I was put into a situation in which I had to think on the fly, but even with my mind screaming at me to close the door, my body stood stiff in fear. I assumed it was some stupid prank, but by the time the men in the masks got to my door, I slammed it shut and locked them out. I stood on the other side of the door with my back pressed firmly against it as if my petite 70-pound body would do anything against two grown men. On either side of my front door there were skinny windows. I peeked out to see what they were planning on doing, but there was no one there. Not so much as a shadow running away from my house. After that, I didn't enjoy trick-or-treating too much until I matured and started enjoying scary movies more than most people should. That being said, I still loved Halloween more than any holiday, but I spent it trying to throw parties in my young adulthood or watching a scary movie with my older sister. I've done that every year for the last decade. I recently turned 20 back in September of 2020, but I fear that this year is going to be different. Back in July of this year, a double homicide occurred in my own town. A man was shot twice over by the town cemetery and the suspect was never caught, but he wore a mask. 3 months after it happened, the start of October, I was home alone at night while my parents were out on a date. I had just bought myself some guitar wall hangers and hung them up earlier that day, so I was feeling good. I was eating leftovers for dinner downstairs around 9 p.m., and my quaint little dinner for one was interrupted by a loud bang followed by the sound of wood bouncing on a hard floor. I immediately assumed the guitar hangers on my wall collapsed and my acoustic guitar shattered, so I ran to the front of my house where the music room is. Once I turn the corner, I see something far more upsetting to me than the shrapnel of my acoustic. My front door was wide open. The wood I had heard was part of the door frame that was ripped off when the door was kicked in. I'm 20 years old, and at this point in my life I had gone through many situations in which I had to be the brave one. I went to go get my Louisville slugger bat and then carefully crept to my front door. I saw no one. Again. The only evidence I had to go off of was the shoe print in the center of my door. Reluctantly, I stepped outside to look for more evidence on what happened. Then, I saw something in my yard. It's so dark outside I can't even make it out. I walk over to it to see what I lost in the grass earlier today because that's what I assumed it was. After picking it up, I dropped it and sprinted back into my house and called the police. I went into my room and locked the door because my front door couldn't even close anymore. I waited in the corner of my room, a 20-year-old man clutching onto a baseball bat and frozen in fear again, until the red and blue light shined through my window. The police came in and questioned me about what happened. I gave them every answer I could about everything except for one small detail I didn't know. Who does this mask belong to, son? Halloween is coming up soon, and I don't know what my plans are this year. I do know one thing for sure, though. I am not answering the door this time. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had any spooky encounters on Halloween? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.